Newfangled Audio's Invigorate plugin has just been released, giving producers and mixers the ability to continuously and smoothly move from compression to limiting and on over into overdrive and distortion. So here's a breakdown of how Invigorate brings these three separate processes together into one package to open up a whole new world of sonic possibilities. Hi, I'm Damian Taylor. I'm a record producer, mixer, songwriter, all-around studio nerd, and my entire adult life has been completely devoted to helping artists and other producers make groundbreaking world-class records. I have had the last week or so to play with Invigorate before it got released, and in this video I'm going to be sharing everything I've learned so that you can confidently dive in yourself and try it out. First up, we're going to talk a little bit about the design philosophies behind Invigorate. Then I'm going to do a bit of a walkthrough of the controls and the capabilities. Then we're going to chat about some mixing philosophy, and that will lead into me sharing a little bit of the thinking behind some of the presets that I have made for Invigorate. All right, so let's have this philosophical chat. Best to start probably with the Newfangled Audio, I guess you could call it mission statement, which you'll find in the back of their manual. And my really oversimplified paraphrasing here is that there's been an amazing history of designs in audio engineering, but it's quite common for us as humans to spend all our time looking back to the past. And so what would happen if we were just building stuff based on new and emerging technologies, new ideas? So in a way, Newfangled Audio is a place to explore new possibilities for sound for artists, producers, and engineers. Now, we normally think about compression, limiting, and overdrive or distortion as being three pretty distinct processes. But Dan Gillespie's brain said, well, at their heart, at their core, they kind of do the same thing. So even though the time difference is dramatically different between all of them, now that we don't have to worry about what value of capacitors or what value of pots we've got, why don't we kind of put them all together and see what happens? So altogether, in Dan's words, he says, let me read this here, Invigorate is a deconstructed compressor, limiter, and overdrive distortion fine-tuned, my friends, to add life to your mix, drum bus, or any other element. Now, before we dive in, I'm curious, like, what is your go-to on your mix bus, on your drum bus, and what do you like about it? And where do you feel it could be improved, or what don't you like about it? Just let us know in the comments below. So why don't we dive in and have a look at Invigorate? Let me press this button over here. And you'll see, if you're familiar with anything that Newfangled have done before, their design language is very consistent. It's very distinctive, but very clean, very clear. I like it a lot. Now, before we get into any of the controls, it is worth knowing that there's a little grabby corner on the corner of the plugin there, so you can resize it. So for this video, let's just make this as big as we can to help you see it. And by this point, you're doubtless noticing that we have this ginormous thing up the top of the plugin here that doesn't really look like anything else. Dan calls this the radar, and basically this is like a sweepable control that goes between compression, limiting, and overdrive. And as you go from the center to the top, the amount of drive increases. So we go from 0 dB boost up to 36 dB of boost. Now, while all this is happening, you're doubtless seeing that this curve here is moving around like crazy, which is giving you some kind of hint about the mysterious secret guts of Invigorate. And as you start to play with Invigorate, you'll really notice that the interplay, the way all the different controls relate to each other, is pretty bonkers. Okay, so we've got the radar up here. Let me just make sure I'm in a good spot. Let me just actually blast a quick bit of drums at you. This is from an unreleased track. Well, it's being released next year from Chewy, who is a brilliant artist who I produced. So, I mean, we'll just move this around and check it out. So nice and gentle there. Like really crazy, juicy limiting. Getting really intense knock off that compression, something blended in between. And then we can start to introduce some overdrive over here. Now we're introducing a lot of overdrive, but if we run all these as well, nice and subtle, you can still get a really, really, really nice change of tone. So even just playing with the radar control on its own, hours of fun. You start throwing in the curve and level detection and things get really interesting. Now let's talk about level detection. or the level detector, I should say. Now, I've been using compressors and limiters for decades and feel very comfortable, very confident when I see an attack and a release. But I found playing with these guys, they feel a little bit different. Well, for one thing, from what I can understand, compress and limit have their own independent envelope controls. I'm not too sure if as you move on the radar from compress to limit, if it's a straight up crossfade, which is pretty cool if it is, or if there's some kind of interaction and a single process coming out. Literally on the Invigorate manual, it says something like secret Invigorate process. So it's a bit of a mystery, but I do love the fact that it is mysterious because it just makes you tweak stuff around until it sounds good. And then there's a huge interaction as you play with the shape and squash here. So remember, we're literally just looking at the pretty pictures, and you'll see how as we move shape, it goes from being a bit of a smoother, kind of consistent push up and then leveling out of compression, to being a little bit square, and then you get this interesting peak and then drop down again. So this is a really nice indication of, oh, you put the tiniest bit of signal in there, it gets really loud, and then as that signal gets louder, it actually pulls it back, so it completely messes with the shape. Hence the shape of the sound that's coming in or going out. So anyway, shape and squash, they basically, you know, they affect the way that the whole processor works. Whether that's overdrive, let's put those all up on 100 there, or none, or whether we're in compression territory. Oh, listen to that. Oh. Now, I gotta say, as I got to know Invigorate, I spent all day just sitting there making guitar face. Oh, chef's kiss. Just, you'll hit these moments where there's a perfect kind of confluence of all these factors and something really jumps out of the speakers. Okay, so we've had a look at these top two curve controls. Let's just quickly check out what happens with this attack and release. If we're over on compress, I'll actually go for a more neutral shape here. Kind of pretty neutral on both of them, but we're going to compress this really hard. Check out this release control. That's really lovely. Now, this is where it's like, I know Dan Gillespie, the designer, I know he's doing clever things with computers, but to me, the way that this detector works, it may or it may not be, but it feels really intelligent. And there's something Dan actually wrote in here, I think it's in the manual. I'm used to seeing attack and release referred to as the amount of time it takes gain reduction to happen. Whereas in the Invigorate manual, he says the amount of time it takes the detector to start working, or words to that effect. It was a little bit, it was very just interesting, the language, and it made me feel that these work in a pretty different way to the normal compressors, normal dynamic units I'm used to. And I'm sure, especially if you've been mixing for a long time, you really know that we really develop this kind of visceral understanding of the way that the time constants work on our different pieces of gear. So I think you'll really enjoy getting to explore those ones. I'm off on a tangent, so let's keep going. Now, we have this anti-pump control here. That's basically a high-pass filter in the side chain, in the detection circuit. Here it is, pretty high up. So just listen to how this compressor is reacting to the kick. We put it all the way down. And now we're pumping a lot more off the low-end stuff. And again, interesting language, anti-pump. There's something very nice and kind of, I'm just going to say extreme, but musically extreme in the way these work. All right, I won't just sit here and make you listen to me tweak controls all day and night. Now, the next thing you'll notice, probably after the radar, is that there's this enormous mix control. So you can always tell like a designer is making choices the way that they arrange a piece of equipment. And so on this one, I think Dan is really suggesting to us that, hey, you might want to consider blending in this extremely processed dynamic signal with the original. Now, here we go. Here's the drums dry. And yeah, something like that is great. We're getting some nice energy coming through, but we still know that that's going to work really well with everything else. Quick public service announcement, especially if you are newer to mixing, just because something sounds amazing in solo does not mean it will sound great in your mix. Because remember, everything's got to fit together. Anyhow, I'm gonna carry on here. I'm loving the tangents today. Okay, so under mix we have this compensate gain button. Now this relates to what's happening underneath. You'll see that there's this kind of nom level, like nominal level, and then in yellow there's learn. Now we know that Newfangled Audio was all about using machine learning, and what the learn button does is you press it, you'll notice this, you press it, then you'll notice the level here start to change. So basically Invigorate is learning how loud your signal is, what the dynamic shape of it is. And the manual recommends that you go to the loudest part of your track and play it a few times with learn on, so that when you then go and start tweaking it, it's going to compensate gain. It's going to basically take the most boring control on a compressor or on a limiter, the makeup gain, and do it automatically for you. So now that we have that done, let's check what it feels like when we sweep around on the radar. So we're fully wet here. Now you'll notice we're over at these extreme settings where before it was like super loud, but the overall volume is a lot more consistent. Now just watch your ears. If we switch off compensate gain, way louder. So I think this was put into Invigorate to avoid the kind of placebo effect of, well, this is louder, so it must be better. So it's really cool that this was built into the design of the plugin, and that we have this new intelligent, clever way of accessing this. It kind of helps us explore with a lot more freedom. Okay. Are you sitting down? Because if you thought this was good, it's about to get crazy. Well, actually, before it gets really crazy, let me just show you this gate control here. So if we start over on compression, we're pretty sure what a gate is, right? On a compressor, it kind of lets the hits through, right? But as we move over, it starts kind of doing some weird stuff on limit. It's almost like the leftover bits of bit crushing, even though it's not. And then we move to overdrive. And listen to the difference between this and this. Apparently, like, it's something to do with this, like, alert. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about right now, but apparently, like, fuzz tones or fuzz circuitry starts doing stuff where it's like the center of the waveform gets kind of clipped out. So the gate stuff just, it does weird things. I don't really quite get it, but it sounds good. And that's really what I'm finding consistently with Invigorate. I don't really know what's happening, but I like it. And so even though it's quite complex, there's all these interacting controls, there's some machine learning under the hood. It actually, to me, feels a lot like many of the best classic pieces of equipment where no matter where you set it, it sounds good. It's just then, is that right for the track or not? Okay, now I warned we had some crazy stuff coming up. This is for me where Invigorate goes beyond like, oh, that's really cool, to like, whoa, this is something crazy. So down the bottom here, you'll see we have this tone control, and this, you know, it looks pretty straightforward, right? It's like a kind of a 3-band EQ, and we can move our frequencies here. But you'll notice we have an output tone that's highlighted right now, an input exciter, again with 3 bands, and then we have this sensitivity one. So this is where it gets cool. Okay, so sensitivity basically affects the way that the level detector, that the sidechain circuitry is going to hear what's going on. So if we throw this back over to compression, just because it's nice and obvious, we'll turn gate off for now. Okay, so check this out. If I'm just going to really exaggerate this. So let's put our low frequencies way the hell up. Okay, so now our kicks are just totally choking the compressor, but let's do the opposite. Okay, so we've now pulled out basically the low frequencies in the side chain. But this is really, really controllable, and we can actually move this around and just make it a little bit less sensitive to the low end stuff. Way less sensitive, way more reactive, all this good stuff. And of course, unlike a sidechain filter, this isn't just the low frequencies. Now we can say, okay, I really want this compressor to be like reacting, or the whole processor, I should say. We really want it to be reacting to the mid-range. So maybe got like some crazy snares and mid-range percussion going on, which we do in this track. So now see how it's really like snares and everything are triggering that. Just hear what's happening to like our hi-hats. Maybe we pull the sensitivity way back, but push the high end way up. Now, I've only been using this on program beats so far, but I'd be fascinated to see how this works on drum kits with big cymbals, like room mics, all that kind of stuff. I think there's a lot of potential. Okay, so the sensitivity, you might have noticed when I'm moving these around, we're hearing the compression change, but these controls are not in the signal path. Whereas when we move to the input exciter here, these ones are in the signal path. So if we pull these down, you'll notice we're totally thinning out the sound as well, which is going to be really interesting once we get over to like overdrive and stuff. Okay, so we can get into some pretty badass kind of like effecty things here. We could do the total opposite. And because the range on this, we have a 12 dB boost, and then the cuts here go all the way down to minus 100. So there's a big jump from around like minus 20 or so here, and then suddenly we're at minus 100. So these are virtually muting frequency bands. So we're kind of in like a techno territory now. I really love it. And incidentally, just check how the interplay on all these controls works here. It's lovely. Okay, so I'm going to switch this input exciter off. Actually, no, let's leave it on, but we'll just get a crazy setting again. I'm going to pull gate off, squash down, pull that back. We'll put this kind of normalish, but I really want to crank the top end here. Okay, so this is making like super kind of trashy, which could be cool for excitement, but it might be a little bit harsh when we start blending it in. So now we can go to output tone, which of course happens at the very, very, very end of the signal chain. And we could just go in here and maybe say, okay, we're gonna just totally round off the top end. All right. There it is, on really, really kind of harsh and spitty. Or there we're getting really like nice texture without it being too overwhelming. If we do a big smiley curve on here, we might then wanna, oh, look at that. So yeah, again, interplay. How does a sensitivity affect what the compressor is doing without us hearing the changes directly? Then we use this input exciter to affect the whole harmonic process and dynamic process that's going to happen in here, and then our output tone to shape this really precisely. Now, we're getting into something here that's a bit over my head again, but, well, this bit is not over my head. The most important thing to understand in engineering isn't, the intricacies of mixed bus transformers or anything like that. It's not multiband compression. It's not which model of Neumann microphone you need to pick. It's simply phase. Is it in phase? Phase relationships. How do the moving waveforms between signals interact? And if you have one signal, do you have different taps into that signal that are moving at the wrong time or not moving together? So phase relationship is huge. Now, for those of you who are a bit design nerdy, you will know, or you might have kind of intuited, okay, we got all these kind of overlapping filters happening here through these EQs. So that starts to introduce a lot of phase change into the signal. And that is, I think, also why Dan made the mix knob really huge here. And I think he's gone to a lot of trouble to make sure that all those tonal controls, when you work with the mix, that they are phase locked and phase accurate. Dan's been really cool. I actually emailed him about this because I personally love when I'm mixing drums, I like to have separate channels with different parallel returns. So I'll have a kind of a cleaner channel, and then, you know, I've got a big squishy one here, and then a big distorty one here. And when I was first playing with Invigorate, I was like, oh my gosh, these are going to be amazing on return channels. I tried to set it up on a return, set it all the way wet, and when I brought it in, there's a lot of weird phase stuff that happens, and that's basically because Invigorate has these very, very in-depth EQ filter things going on. So I chatted with Dan about it, and he was like, you know what, yeah, let's make a linear phase version. So Newfangled Audio is working on this right now. We will have it at some point in the future. Like, massive respect to Dan for being willing to go there. I think that this is going to take Invigorate from just being like a really, really, really cool plugin to basically being pretty indispensable. So what that means for you right now is, if you want to use Invigorate in parallel, and that's kind of how it's just begging to be used, then make sure you are blending it within the plugin itself. If you have a bunch of separate drum returns in Pro Tools, or you have a bunch of parallel chains in Ableton Live, or whatever your DAW of choice is, then Dan was pointing out you could actually have those all then going back into a single stereo bus, so that you could apply Invigorate there. So I'm looking forward to the linear phase version. Thanks in advance, Dan, for making it happen, but just be aware of that right now. Okay, so I think that's pretty good for the walkthrough. Why don't we just like zoom out right now and talk big picture about some mixing concepts. And probably the biggest challenge we face as mixers, well, there are many challenges. One of the threads of challenges we face is that we want the music to feel the same, or as close as possible, no matter what system it's being played on. So whether we're talking on like a tiny little sound system, or like a ginormous PA, or in a cinema, or in a car, or headphones, we want the emotional core of that song, we want the energy of that song, we want the engagement, the excitement of that song to be pretty consistent. Like, yes, if we hear it hugely loud, that's going to be pretty damn exciting. But there's no reason why a mix on a quiet system won't still communicate that to you, even if it's not as visceral. So really what this boils down to is translation. And so as mixers, our big challenge is to get translation, you need to be able to focus the dynamics and energy of a song into quite a precise spot. Now, if you over-focus, if you go too small, that's when we get into the whole like squeezing the life out of it. That's when things start to sound really unpleasant when you turn them up, because you're suddenly getting this brick wall of sandpaper. If we don't focus it enough, then the music isn't coherent enough. It doesn't feel like a unified whole, and it won't really like jump out of the speakers. It's cool if you're in like a really big audiophile setting and it's nice and loud and you have an incredibly detailed system. But in like the real world, it's very difficult really I'm gonna say to make people want to listen to the record. And so I really feel like kind of my sacred duty as a mixer is to help bridge that connection between the artist's intention and the listener's ears. So to do that, focusing energy, okay? So this is really, what the mission statement with Invigorate was, is like help you bring excitement, help you bring energy into your mix. And when we have all these cool parallel things, that lets us do it in a very, very controlled way. And then with all those tone controls, input exciters, sensitivities, anti-pumps, we have so many different ways to shape that excitement, to shape that energy. So this is probably a pretty good moment for me to talk to you about. I'll just pick a couple of my presets at random that I designed, and we'll talk about like how with that thinking, how I applied it to these settings. So again, same drum bus. Why don't we go into here? You can go into Damian Taylor. The very first one here, I try to really name my presets to do what the Brits say, does what it says on the tin. So drum bus, Chewy, mid-range. Let's check this one out. Some of these, by the way, it is worth mentioning as well. This is a very, very cool feature of Invigorate, is once you set that learn level, even if you change presets, you'll notice the nominal level here does not change between settings. Okay, so you can be jumping through a whole ton of different settings, and the nominal level will be the same. So I'm actually going to crank this up because this was designed with a slightly higher level. So Chewy mid-range. what does that sound like to you? We want our mid-range to be a bit thicker, to be something that we can really sink our teeth into, okay? So if we put this totally dry, there we go, and we crank up the blend here. Can you hear now how like we're just getting like the tails, the sustains of all the drums now are way juicier. Here it's all a bit tick, tick, tick. Push it up. There's more to it. And here we go, all the way wet. Okay, so you'll see, just based on the tricks we were doing before, what this is all about. The input sensitivity here is cranked up in the mid-range. Like incredibly fast attacks. We're basically eliminating transients so that we can mix in a lot more without getting in the way, or without making the transients or the attacks like more, I'm going to say more stressful. So it's really bringing up kind of the back end, the tone of all the drums. Anything happening on the input exciter? Not really. Tone's pretty flat. And yeah, then we got like a pretty gentle shape and squash going on here as well. And a nice setting on the release, so we get a wah kind of off the back of it. And we're doing a little bit of a blend between compression and limiting. All right, next one. Totally different. Drum bus, crispy, deep fried limiter. Okay, so this is, again, does what it says on the tin. Crispy. It's intense. Now this one, the mix is all the way wet, but you can see here our output tone, we've pulled down the low end, we've pulled down the top end. On the input exciter, that's flat. The sensitivity, it's pushing into the mids a little bit more, a little bit into the tops. We've got a slightly more intense shape on the curve. Anti-pump is lifted up above the kick drums, and then attack and release are like both really, really fast. And this is actually a limiting thing here, but it's one of the most intense distortions I found on here. So if we put this all the way dry, this is the kind of thing I feel like I might want to just blend in a tiny, tiny bit in a big loud song in a big loud moment. It might be something that you kind of save for a third chorus, maybe sneak in a little bit in a couple of earlier choruses, or you could actually use for like a weird turnaround. You want like a 2 or a 4 bar change up, pull the dry drums back a bit and push this quite far forward. So yeah, so you can really quite dramatically change the character of the drums if you do that, or otherwise it's just more of a moment like everything is going off and we want our drums to lift up to meet it. This kind of stuff is especially really useful when we are dealing with programmed drums like this. And then let's just pick one more here. Okay, drum bus open. So we'll see here, slower attack, little bit of a faster release. We're getting a bit more tasty on the curve. Anti-pump is lifted up. We've just eased back a fraction on our kick drum sensitivity. Input exciter is flat, output tone is flat. So let's just, we're mostly in the compression range, hitting it pretty hard. Okay, so this is no mix, and then we start blending this in. So can you see around here, we're just getting more of the kind of air that's in all these drums. Again, dry. Now push this a bit more. Yeah, like somewhere like that I really like. So I would, that kind of the openness, you could almost think of it as like the window is open in the room. So this actually helps us get a bit more depth, a bit more air, and a bit more of a kind of a 3D vibe to our drums. Let me just play this to you fully wet. So we're letting a lot more of the transients through, and for me what I'm kind of hearing is it's like we get our attack, then we get a little pushback, and then we get like a kind of a rise back up. So we get a pretty tasty. Okay, so I've been talking about drums this whole time. Let me just really quickly show you. I did a ton of presets on here. We don't have the time to go through all of them in the video. Drop a comment if you'd like me to share some more of my thinking on some other presets on here. I could talk about this stuff all day, and you've probably noticed I kind of do. So we're now on a sub bass. This is the sub harmonic parallel. We're using a really nice kind of pretty, gentle but consistent curve. See, our shape is pushed all the way back, squashes up. I was going to say attack and release are off, but we're over on overdrive. Output tone, we've pulled down some low end. Input exciter is all bass, and our sensitivity is flat. So this is a sound flat. It's like a Moog sub. If you're looking at this on a phone, you probably won't hear this at all. So you could do headphones, or you could just see what's happening now if we go all the way wet. it's basically just like a nice fuzzy version, so we can just fade that in there a little bit. And that's the kind of stuff that really, just a little pinch of that will help your ear find the bass notes. So that's really, I like using this term, help your ear find. It'll help those come through more on small speakers, and it'll also help your subs meet up, kind of join into the lower mids in your mix. So we got that one, and then this song, again, this is coming out next year from Iskway. The song is called End of It All. We have these kind of crazy saxophones. This is a whole processed bus, which I processed when we initially recorded it, processed it more in here. So this is what we're dealing with. Okay, now I actually, this is a finished mix that I've got opened up here, so I built a parallel for these that sounds like this. So really like the attacks, all the breaths, like really crunches it forward. The delays that are on the channel, like it really makes them open up. So this is basically just like we're smashing it. It's sitting over the top of a whole bunch of like really buzzy, fuzzy synths. So I kind of wanted this to be like an organic layer that makes synths sound alive. So let's switch off the one I used. I think I used a Thermonic Culture Vulture. We'll fire up Invigorate, and then there is a setting here called SaxBus Intense and Unnatural. And as you know, intense and unnatural is exactly what we're looking for in our processing these days. So let me switch this over here. So we are mostly in the overdrive terrain. Let me push this over. See how that's just basically like quite an intense, almost like nasty top end? The input exciter is all hitting the breath frequencies. Sensitivity, we're just pulling a little bit of sensitivity down there to fundamental frequencies, and the output tone is flat, but really it's mostly overdrive with a little bit of limiting. We've pushed our squash up a bit more. And then when we mix this in, we go from nice and round and kind of natural, even though it's a bit weird. I actually crank the output here. So basically what the natural, the unprocessed one, which again is processed earlier, that's able to kind of move in and out a little bit more. That gives us a warmth. And then we've got this kind of intense top end, which helps us really find it, but it's not too scratchy. So we're not like trying to EQ this up to be too bright. Instead, that thing we were talking about earlier, we're focusing the energy of the upper harmonics, the top end, so that that's quite constant, and that can sit over the top of a bunch of really intense elements. Again, I'm sorry I can't play the whole track right now, but yeah, follow Iskway on all the socials and you'll know when it comes out. It's a banger. All right, so I think, where are we now? Let me just check my notes. So yeah, what's the summary here? What's the summary of Invigorate? For me, number one, it's original. That's a whole Newfangled Audio mission statement, not trying to recreate the past, but instead draw on the possibilities that we have with modern technology to do something different, to give engineers and artists new tools, new ways to express themselves, new stuff to explore. So for me, that's the biggest thing. It doesn't feel like anything else I've got. I love going into it and not really knowing what the hell I'm doing, but knowing that I can twist knobs everywhere and cool stuff just kind of comes out of it. If you have been mixing for a long time, or you've been in the studio for a long time, I'm sure you could relate to this. On the one hand, you know what everything does, so you can kind of move at the speed of thought, but then sometimes there's not really room for surprises. So, you know, I put this whole stuff into my studio because I wanted more surprises, and in a way, I'm finding that Invigorate is kind of like a dynamic and harmonic surprise box. But I am really looking forward to getting to know it a lot in the future. So yeah, it's original, it's deep, like there's a lot that you can explore in here. I mentioned it's like, you know, it's really hard to make it sound bad. This is like a hallmark of classic gear, like an old school Neve EQ. You can crank it anywhere you want and it kind of sounds great everywhere. It's just a case, not if it's good or bad, but if it's right for the track. So I really love that. I love that it encourages exploration and that it's very intuitive to tweak. Not necessarily that I understand exactly what's happening, but you can kind of really feel the changes, which is lovely. And I think I mentioned this earlier, I just found myself doing like that guitar solo. It's like going, oh, all the time. So yeah, those are my impressions. But yeah, listen, there's a link below if you want to get Invigorate for yourself. Please do leave a comment. Let me know if there's anything that you're really keen to check out. Let me know if you want to see some more videos with the settings. And then also, I'd love it if you could join us on the Complete Producer Network if you want to have a deeper conversation about this. Complete Producer Network is an online community I set up where people could have like really in-depth, supportive conversations about all aspects of creating and releasing music in the modern era. So if that sounds good to you, just go to completeproducer.net, and I look forward to seeing you there.